Hey guys, it's Horror Free for All, better known as Goosebumps Completionists, and I hope you're doing well tonight. I'm joined here with my good friend, the Horrorlander. How are you doing tonight?
Yo, 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 people and patrons of the night. If you know me, I am no stranger to this channel. Me and my friend have done collabs before. We're on the Goose Junkies podcast together. We are familiar with each other and talk about kids' horror content on a daily basis, which is why this is an exciting collab. Because without going into too much into it, before we actually talk about the topic, it's rare that I get to talk about something which I grew up with, right? A lot of the time when we discuss Goosebumps and Are You Afraid of the Dark and other things, these are things that are before my time. But the topic that we talk about today is something near and dear to my heart because I grew up with it on a weekly basis as a kid. And I know we are both fans of it. And if you told me that this topic would have relevance again, in some future, a few years ago, I would have been like, that's hopeful thinking. But that's why you never say never because now it is relevant. And now we get to make this fun topic. So thank you for having me on.
Yeah, no problem. And thanks for the preamble because I wanted to just segue into what I was going to say. But um, what he's referring to, everyone, is Haunting Hour. Haunting Hour, yes. And you might be like, whoa, whoa, whoa. What do you guys got cooking up here, right? Well, what's going on, right? Well, in case you live under a rock, Haunting Hour it has come back on Tubi. Um, Last year they came out with a Pumpkinhead movie based on, or I guess loosely based on the Arlstein short story, which also got adapted in the original Haunting Hour television show, and they're coming out with a sequel, I think, planned to release this year, Pumpkinhead 2. So we were, cooking up some ideas, me and the Horrorlander in Discord, about the future of kids horror and where things are going and what to anticipate. And we both seem to think that if there's any IP to come back as an anthology TV show, I think Haunting Hour has the strongest case for that argument right now. So we want to put our flag. We want to plant the flag because we are passionate kids horror fans. So what we did is we compiled a list of 16 short stories that essentially would make a perfect season of Haunting Hour if they were to bring the show back. Now, our envisioning point of the Haunting Hour is to, of course, continue the legacy that that original show brought on the Hub Network that made millions of kids scared in the late 2000s and early 2010s. But we also want to bring it into modern times. You know, Goosebumps 2023 claimed they were trying to do this with Goosebumps, right? Where they're trying to make it scarier and darker for kids these days. Well, we're going to try to do that here with Haunting Hour. But we're also going to keep it for everyone. We do realize that this is kids' horror. This is not something that we should be putting TV 14 or I guess whatever the hot TVMA. It's not going to be anything like that. But it will be TV 14 more so adjacent where you're going to notice some hallmarks of the original Haunting Hour show. There's actually some stories that feel like spiritual successors or remakes, but with totally different ideas to classic stuff that you know, and might actually be better than the stuff that you formerly knew. It just depends on if they make it good, which I have utmost faith in because a lot of these stories, as is, are pretty much ready to go, if not for a few things that need some tweaking. More so with the endings in a lot of these. Um, and I think the Horrorlander will probably attune to this. We both think that the Haunting Hour, at least when we think back on that original show, most of the stuff that is well regarded is more dark in nature, more serious in nature, more out there and horrific, either with creatures, more cerebral horror with more humanistic villains. There's always some sort of very harsh reality, immorality kind of play going on with the main characters where bad things happen to them. And sometimes it's heavily implied to be death, and sometimes it's pretty much evident that that's what's going on. That's going to be in a lot of these stories. I'm not saying all of them, but a lot. So if you're worried about Haunting Hour continuing and being progressively darker than its predecessor, or former counterpart, then you shouldn't worry too much because, of course, we know what's appropriate in kids horror. We're not picking things where kids are becoming serial killers and stabbing people. It's nothing like that. This is pretty much in vein of the old, just with a little more emphasis on the dark. And that's what we were aiming for. So, yeah, you want to continue on to that, Horlander?
Yeah, I mean, this list that we came up with, I mean, not to pat ourselves in the back, but we did put a lot of thought into it. There were some things we had to cut out. Basically, we were just going for two big things. Is this going to be dark without pushing it too far? Is this going to be, high stakes tension, some of the things that we enjoy from the old show? Is it bringing new stuff that fans are going to remember? And don't forget the title, right? It's called The Haunting Hour. This has to haunt you. This has to linger with you. It has to stay with you after you finish watching it, right? It's not it's beating the point if these things don't, remain memorable to you. And at the same time, we wanted to keep variety. So, there are some stories that we thought that could be great, but we don't want it to feel like it's repeating. So we're trying to give you guys a little bit of everything. So I feel that
Yeah.
we've done a great job, and I think we put a lot of time into this.
Yeah. And to kind of like continue on to that too, some people might be like, wasn't Haunting Hour mainly a show where they wrote stuff for it? Why are you picking stuff to adapt? Well, here's my counter argument to that. All right, this isn't like Goosebumps or Tales from the Crypt where there's like a plethora of stuff to adapt where actually making new content would be worthwhile for fans to come to a TV show for. Haunting Hour in like Creep Show or like the other side of the coin, right? Where it's basically almost always new content. So adaptations actually is more exciting because you can actually throw some ideas at the wall and actually have them stick, you know, without having to be pigeonholed to one franchise. Like you had to only pick EC Comics, only pick Goosebumps books or Goosebumps stories to adapt, right? This leaves it open for everything. And that makes it much more exciting. And all these stories we pick from actually come from short story collections or even some comic collections out there or from like many small franchises that made their name off anthology, which I think Haunting Hour needs to be in the core of it. I would love to see two-part episodes adapt books from some Goosebumps inspired series. I would love that hypothetically, but for the most part I think it keeping true to its, I guess, originator's nature. You know, Nightmare Hour and The Haunting Hour were the main backbone of influence on that show. On that original show, I should say. Those two books written by R.L. Stine were short story collections. So I feel like picking short stories is the right way to go. Whether we're talking about 8 pages to 60 pages, whatever you want to count as a short story, it's fine by me. Um, that's where it should be. So that was why we picked all of these stories um, in short story. Like there's no full books here. So before you go, oh, this book would be cool from Strange Matter, or this book would be cool from Spine Tinglers. We get that, but just hear us out. we got some really good picks. All right, we got some really 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 good picks. So we have 16 we're going to go over, so we have a lot to talk about. We're going to try to keep it expedient on each one, not spend too much time, but this first one I think we're probably going to spend the most time because since it's an R.L. Stine property, we do feel obligated. We have to include an R.L. Stine story to start, right? And I'll pass it over to the Horrorlander to start us off with our first round draft pick here.
So this one I'm actually excited about. Of course, it is R.L. Stine. This is going to be the most memorable one, the most popular one. But it is actually one of my favorite R.L. Stine short stories of all time, and it's not from Goosebumps. This is something adjacent. It came from the Haunting Hour collection, aptly named. That is Losers by R.L. Stine. Now, Losers by R.L. Stine, the short story, without giving too much away, because we have to talk about some of our ideas involving how we'll do this, is basically a short story about these group of kids who are at this local carnival that's going on. And the carnival has different competitions going on. It has games, it has some kind of freak show type of competitive attractions and things like that. And in the group, there are these two boys and there's this girl. Now, the girl is more like ethically moral. She basically is trying to kind of dissuade the boys from doing their normal sense of actions because these boys, to put it kind of frank, are kind of shitheads, right? They keep on insulting different people. They keep on making fun of the different freak show people. If there are competitive eaters, they make fun of them being overweight and gluttonous and disgusting. They keep making fun of all the stupid produce and harvest stuff that they're selling, basically insulting everybody just because they think they're superior. And what ends up happening is that when the girl ends up leaving, these boys don't realize that there are people watching them in the carnival. And they may take them into a freak show tent and make them the new sideshow attraction for some onlookers. And there is some disturbing visuals. There is some experimentation stuff that goes on. And these kids effectively end up becoming losers. They think they're on top of life. They think they're winners, and now they're at the bottom of the totem pole. And it is quite disturbing. It gets into some almost cult-like, feeling type of stuff. And eventually, the story ends with them thinking that maybe this was all some crazy dream. Maybe they all hallucinated. But then they have a reminder in a form of branding that happens to them that reminds them of this experience. Now, this short story on its own has some things to it that work for only a short story. As an episode, it would need some expansion. And there are some things about some bodily mutations, mostly focusing on the overweight angle that, with stuff like say cheese and die again, people can find cringe, people can find, a little bit distasteful. So what we're deciding to do is that, Comp will talk a little bit about it as well. But we believe that there's some tweaks that can be made. So we're going to keep the general carnival setting of the story, the sideshow, freak show attraction angle, the delinquent kids who have to learn, that they can't make fun of people, they can't think they're on top of the world because then nature will come in and remind you. But instead of having this weird experimenting cult angle, we think it'll be fun to throw in a creature feature angle, basically a rancor type of monster that these kids can be fed to if they are elected as the winner. So you can have the experimenting freak show attraction, but you can also have some games thrown in there because there are games in the short story. And depending on how you get branded, on how you do with the game as a loser or a winner, whoever is branded as the winner is going to end up getting fed to the monster. So there's some high stakes, there's some tension involving that. And we kind of hypothesize some of the different things that could happen. Maybe the way that the kids get out of the situation is because branding is a key aspect that the monster identifies who to eat and who not to eat. Maybe the kids can do a little bit of a switcheroo, since the winner getting branded ends up being the monster prey. The kid could then maybe take the winner sign and actually end up branding it on one of the adults, another person without them knowing, a little bit of a sleight of hand switcheroo, and actually branding themselves as a loser. So that way, when it comes time to reveal who the winner and loser are, actually the two kids end up being both losers. And the adults are shocked. They're like, well, one of these kids was supposed to be fed. And then the adult checks and sees that, they are branded as the winner. They might get eaten implied. The kids get away. And, the kids are like, since we're branded as losers, we are not going to be targeted again by this carnival because the carnival could use that branding angle as a way to decide on which kids to be chosen for these
Mm-hmm.
carnival attraction and games to be eaten. Because if you're branded as a loser, well, the carnival is not going to target you again because they don't want you coming back to the carnival and maybe getting police on them or finding more suspicious ways to expose them. And at the same time, they can identify you to keep you away. Well, with these kids branded as losers, you can then have an angle where they think they're off the hook, they think they're safe, but because of the situation, because of what happened at the carnival with, this adult being eaten and the kids getting away, they get new management. They actually fire the previous headmaster, they hire a new guy, and the new guy decides, well, I'm going to change the rules. And instead of having winners be chosen, I'm going to now make losers be the one fed to the Rancor. And then it's implied that the kids are actually not off the hook because they thought they got away by branding themselves as losers. Well, now you guys are actually the main targets, and that's going to be the dark implied ending. So that's some of the ideas we did. But Comp, let me know your thoughts. Let me know how you feel about that idea, and also any other pitches you have.
Yeah, like basically, I think we went over it before we hopped on. That's where I'm at with it. Um, Maybe that's something that comes to mind that could be like a funny twist is like, well, the Rancor had to come from something, right? So maybe the Rancor had a mom that ate the losers. or something funny, and maybe the kids can like kill the villain of the story, not maybe on screen, but like villain that's feeding kids to monsters definitely deserves that Aunt Dahlia treatment. Like every once in a while, that's fine. You can kill an adult on screen, but then the twist could be like, oh, but it has a mom that eats the losers, and then the kids like dun dun dun, and then they hear the growl in the background, and the carnival gate shuts on them, and they're trapped inside, and then curtain fades to black. Like you already know the jig is up. There you go. It's basically one. It's basically the horror camp Jelly Jam just in haunting hour. When you think about it, but with that haunting hour like stinger ending that is known for, that twist, that dark twisted ending, and of course, um, the kids being little shitheads, being delinquents, I definitely think there's a lot more room to expand on them in a story like this. Maybe make them feel humility. Maybe see there's weight and consequences to the treatment of others. Maybe they are hecklers and then they're roped into doing this food competition, roped into this scenario. They get to meet people they otherwise would dismiss in their daily lives, and they learn to grow, and you learn to root for them. But because this is haunting hour and everything's a cautionary tale, you gotta know that there's some lesson to be learned here, and that karma is a boomerang, right? So obviously, in order to make that work, maybe you can also throw in an element where we build on in the beginning of the story where the kids want to go to this carnival. The carnival um, just changed ownership the year prior. A long running family sold it to this new guy who's very weird. A kid up and went missing. Maybe the kid could be one of the main character's brothers or sister or something. Make it more emotional there to have some sort of semblance of rootability there. And I think you have a really good shot at taking a short story that has a fun setting and some potential, but making it basically an Haunted Mass 2 syndrome, where you just make a completely different story out of it, make it more whole, and at the same time offering fans what they've been wanting for years out of Goosebumps with Horror Camp Jelly Jam. And I think people would love it.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think overall it'll work. You also got to have the missing kid posters because it wouldn't be haunting hour without
Yeah.
missing kid posters.
Yeah, or like, put them on a milk carton. So, they could be drinking a carton of milk at school. Like, oh, there's Jimmy. He went missing last year. And that'd be an easy segue into the story of how they're going to go to the carnival too. It's classic writing, but it could be done. Yeah. Well, I think Losers is a probably our only R.L. Stein pick for this season. I'm not saying that we have no faith in R.L. Stein. I'm just saying that all the stories that I think they could have done realistically back then, they did. And I think all the ones that realistically could be done now kind of already feel like stuff they've already done. But I'm not saying they can't do more R.L. Stein in future seasons. I'm just saying that there's just a lot more exciting stuff to throw into this hypothetical season that we drafted. Because if they made all of these stories in one, that is one hell of a way to start. That is one hell of a way to start. Um, and because of that mindset, I wanted to go back to the original show in Goosebumps with our number two draft here. This story comes from a guy who contributed stories to the 90s Goosebumps show, some classics you may recognize. And he also contributed two stories to the former Haunting Hour show as well, that you definitely will recognize because they came in the first season. Those were Catching Cold and Pool Shark, and they were written by Neil Shusterman. And Catching Cold actually originated from a short story collection called Darkness Creeping, which essentially is just chock full of stories that feel like Haunting Hour all over the place. But this one, I think, we're going to start with some two parters and using short stories maybe to make two parters. This one is one I would love to see because wait for it. It has the classic kids horror backdrop everybody loves. Private boarding schools, right? The unknown terror of removing kids from the safety net of their family and friends and putting them into a new location with some nefarious teachers and headmasters or whatever name you want to throw on it in the mix. Now, In Ear for Music has those hallmarks that I just mentioned, but the caveat to that is we have a kid with supernatural powers. We have a media savant, so to speak. This story is about a kid who is a musical prodigy. And he's so good at music, in fact, that when he plays music, he can generate flames on his instruments. He can make supernatural things happen by the power of his music. He can't explain it, and he can't really predict when it's going to happen or harness it. But he's then approached by this world-renowned musical teacher who is so impressed by his work that she personally invites him to her prestigious private music school. And the kid, of course, is elated that he's going to be able to be amongst the best of the best that the world has to offer in his craft, but he also, most importantly, wants to learn how to control his ability, which his teacher says that she will be able to do because she hints that she's kind of like him. Now, as the story goes along, you end up finding out when the kid arrives at this school, these other kids are kind of afraid of him and definitely afraid of the teacher. And he can't pinpoint why, but they seem to point him in the direction that there's this private building that she tends to bring her, I don't know, more coveted students to. And let's just say the kid doesn't bat an eye to these warnings because he feels like he's just being hazed, right? They feel like he feels like they're singling him out because he's better than them, and that's his mentality, right? But humility comes into play once starts to go into this building and wants to take private lessons from his teacher, but learns the harsh way over time that this building is basically a hideout for something nefarious the teacher has planned. And we learned a wild backstory and motive behind the teacher and what she has plans for this young gentleman involving his talent, his future, and maybe even his life to a degree. And it's yeah, pretty shocking in that regard. So yeah, interview music. I mentioned this in the past in a different video that I would love to see Goosebumps adapt this because we need more school stories and Goosebumps if we're not going to get Creature Teacher adapted into an episode or maybe The Perfect School getting a remake. But I'm fine putting it here in Haunting Hour because of the humanistic quality to the villain. You know, Haunting Hour is known for more humanoid villains, at least the well-known ones. You do have some monsters like Lily D, the Dream Catcher, the mascot, maybe the aliens from Alien Candy. But there's also a plethora of humanoid villains like Headshot, Wrong Number. The list goes on. And I think that this villain would be goaded for Haunting Hour. And also, like the historical fiction aspect to this story, I didn't really touch on, would be fantastic. It would be absolutely fantastic to see like the flashback imagery that the short story provided. I would love to see what they describe in like ancient Rome. Yes, ancient Rome. That's pretty awesome. Uh, and building on like the timeline of um, a certain character in the story would be absolutely magnificent. And yeah, you have a story about a kid who has a gift, he doesn't know how to control it, and then it's basically about being milked for all you're worth. It's a huge play on the entertainment industry as a whole, where if you have talent, people who see that you have talent try to acquire you and use you for all you're worth. That's what this story is. It sends a powerful message, and it will stick with people, I feel. So that's why I want it on here.
Yeah, no, I think it's Ear for Music. I think is a great pick. Neil Shusterman, obviously very familiar with kids horror and Haunting Hour. Ear for Music is always one I thought's great for Haunting Hour because it has those darker elements, right? It has the cautionary tale about if your ego's too big, eventually you're going to get humbled, right? You have a kid who thinks he's bigger than the program, and he doesn't realize that the program's going to kick in a factory reset, and that's what happens. I think the aspect about what the villain is doing, there was a Tales from the Dark Side episode called The Satanic Piano, which has some similar elements to what this short story is doing. I also really like the idea of a kid having supernatural abilities because, from my culture in Hinduism, we have stories about musicians who will play like divine tunes that are to the gods, and supernatural phenomenon will happen according to the scripture, like weather will kick in, rains will happen, all these different things. The kid has that but doesn't know how to control it. Like, it doesn't, he's not able to understand that I'm able to do all these things for a particular reason, and eventually he ends up becoming prey to something. So yeah, great cautionary tale, and it's a music story. It's got the boarding school setting. I mean, what's not to like?
Mm-hmm. It's got everything you want in like a throwback kids horror story kind of way.
Mhm.
It's a shoe in, and trust me, I just take our word on it. Go check the story out. You'll see what we're talking about. All right, so moving on to number three draft pick here. This one actually comes from, we're starting out with some Fright Time stories. So, me and the Horrorlander recently have been getting into these books. He actually got me into them, and I've been enjoying these. I'm not going to lie. These are some of my favorite collections I've come across in kids' horror. I love the idea of having like a triple feature kind of short story collection, not like being doused with 10 or more stories. I like the triple feature aspect because you're allowed like 60 to 70 pages, kind of like triple header from Goosebumps. And that's a shame that never lasted past two books, but I like the idea of those where you get a little more bark for your bite, right? And this story I actually found in the final book. I decided to read that one first because I had it. And saw no coverage on the internet, and I was like, I love this thing, and this was my favorite story in here. It's written by a fellow named Paul Buchanan. Now, fun fact about Paul Buchanan, not a lot of people know this. He actually wrote his own kids' horror series, but it's not in like the traditional sense that you would think. It's actually a Christian kids' horror series called Heebie Jeebies. And you could fool me because this story about Paul Buchanan doesn't necessarily feel Christian at all. Even though I can kind of see like the afterlife stuff in there that like he kind of talks about, it doesn't feel like there's kitty gloves on it at all with this. It's actually pretty dark and eerie, and it's a story called "It Knows We're Here." Um, this story follows a kid who is into movie making, and his ragtag group of friends who decide to pick up a camera one day and make their dream happen and start filming. And they're trying to film like a movie of sorts for themselves to kind of prove that they can make it. And what ends up happening is once they're done shooting for the day and the main character goes home to edit the footage is nothing that they recorded. The footage is of a family of sorts being stalked by somebody with a camera, at least they think. And then the kid realizes that there's something in the camera staring back at him. And he can't rationalize what he just witnessed until he gets his friends involved. And they start piecing context clues together. The more they film, the more they watch back, and it's not what they're filming. And they think it could be the problem with the camera. The camera is working just fine. They think it could be a problem with maybe the lighting, and then they're like, well, that can't be it because that's not that doesn't affect how people look. So they start putting two and two together, and they realize that um, the people being filmed here possibly are in danger, and this thing inside of the footage could be the cause. But what makes matters worse is that the being that's in the footage does not like the fact that these kids knows that it's in the footage. So it starts coming after the kids, of course, and this plays together symmetrically with that rendezvous that is probably going to happen that you will anticipate. And the story is just really unique, right? You got footage that's not what you're recording, that has a being in there that's trying to come after you because you found it in there. What kind of weird idea is that? But it works so well. And Hunting Hour hasn't really dabbled into found footage all that much. I mean, the closest thing maybe is that like Paranormal Activity throwback thing to Really You, if you know that episode where Lily D just comes up to the camera like this. They can easily make this like a more found footage kind of thing. Not like necessarily go full VHS with it, but like they can have that element there. And that's what a lot of people liked about that Goosebumps the Vanishing episode that came out recently, right? That found footage, what was it, the alien one?
Mhm.
they could easily pull this one off with like a creepy pasta looking monster, and they'll be set. And this one, it also has a really good message about um, chasing chasing a dream, and not letting I guess hardships getting you down. You want to think that the story sticks with that theme the whole time, but it definitely resonates with the characters because they're trying to persevere. They're trying not to waste their time with the resources they have, but they're also trying to at the same time be helpful, and you see some aspect of heroism in the story that you don't expect out of it too. And they do greater good with their work, and that also comes through in the message. So I don't think you were able to read this one, Horlander, but it's a very very good story. And Paul
Yeah.
Buchanan, he has a few in the Fright Time, and I'm ashamed that I didn't get to read them all yet, but I definitely look forward to reading more.
Yeah, I'm upset that I wasn't able to read it due to its rarity, but I remember when you talked about it and talking about it now, just the idea of the entity being in a camera following around a family and you seeing that is so creepy. It is so eerie. I think they had another kind of found footage ish episode in Haunting Hour called Lights Out.
Oh yeah, like
So going into that found footage thing, I think is such a cool thing to do for Haunting Hour, especially with that angle. And even though I didn't read it, you just talking about it reminds me of actually a Haunting Hour episode, which, funny enough, is Red Eyes. It reminds
yeah.
me of the idea of Red Eyes. So I think that's great.
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be some symmetry, with a lot of kids' horror stories. There's bound to be some overlap. Like I said, like some of these stories we mentioned are definitely going to remind you of other things once we describe them to you. But yeah, this one is I think you're gonna like the characters. You're gonna like the message, and I think the main character is Jesse. He is one of like the coolest kids horror protagonists I've read, like in my time. I think a lot of people will like him if they keep him true to the story. He could be like a fan favorite character. So gets my stamp of approval, and yeah, yeah. Okay, we got a lot more to cover, guys. So we're gonna try to keep it moving. All right, our number four draft comes from a story that Mr. Horlander actually recommended, and this one's a wild one. This one's a wild one. Um, Take it away. And
Yeah, this one
yeah,
is another one from Fright Time. Uh-oh, you're going to see a lot of quite a bit of entries from Fright Time. This one was essentially, I'm going to put it like this. Imagine a segment from one of the VHS movies combined with one of the most beloved, iconic Goosebumps stories of all time. Now that I got your attention, let's get into the wild story. This one is called It's After Me by Elaine Cool. Now, It's After Me is essentially about this kid who is kind of not doing well in school. His grades are a little bit down, but he deals with active stage fright, right? He doesn't like getting in front of audiences and doing public speeches, doesn't like the attention. But his teacher, I believe his biology or chemistry teacher, ends up coming to him and explains to him that he's doing this school play and he needs actors, he needs to recruit kids. So he's actually going to give an opportunity to the character to become the lead actor in this school play, which right away the kid is like, "Do you know I have stage fright? Like, this is absolutely the last thing I want to do." But the teacher convinces him and says that I can kind of raise your grades through some extra credit and stuff if you participate. So he's like, "All right, I can get something out of it." And he decides to participate. Now, the school play ends up being about, from what I can remember, it's a magician story about this one magician who basically needs to get up off his feet, and a kid apprentice ends up coming up to him, participating in different tricks with them, and essentially they end up basically raising together money with their magical acts to eventually bring back their business and their lives. So it's quite a heartwarming tale. But as the kid ends up putting on the cape and the magician costume that is meant to be for this lead actor role, he realizes that the cape might have some sentience to it. This cape might have some extraordinary things going on because every time he puts on this cape, he ends up becoming more aggressive towards other people. He starts acting out of character. And he realizes that there is an influence which is being put on him. And nobody believes him except for his best friend, which is probably one of the greatest best friends in all of kids' horror because he right away believes his best friend and he's not lying. And they start trying to work up a way to figure out more about the cape. And they realize the cape might have some other magical abilities. It might be able to come to life and perform certain things. It might be a living creature. There might be some supernatural, even cosmic level things going on with this entity. And they have to find out a way not only to free the influence of this cape from the lead actor kid, but also find a way to get rid of it before it causes more problems during the school play. That's effectively the story. This one is a mixture of the haunted mask with the VHS viral segment, which I forgot the name of, but it's about a magician in Las Vegas who ends up getting this magical cape that may or may not be possessed by an entity that gives them real magical powers. So it's basically like a mixture of that. I think it's such a cool concept. You know, as soon as I saw the influence being done on the kid, changing his personality, I'm like, fans are going to resonate with that because we all love the haunted mask and we know Carly Betts' personality changes with the entity. Might be a hot take, but I actually like that VHS viral segment with that magical cape that has sentience that can give that guy powers. Having that here is pretty cool. There is some wild scenes akin to stuff you would see from like Doctor Strange involving the cape and different things it can do. So this can get pretty wild. There's also some quite horrific transformation sequences with the cape. And I love the fact that it takes place with a school play because school plays are done in kids' horror. You got Phantom of the Auditorium from Goosebumps. You got The Tale of the Walking Shadow or whatever it was from Are You Afraid of the Dark? And there's quite a divisive episode in Haunting Hour called Stage Fright, right? So Haunting Hour has already done a stage play episode, but I think this one is more active. It's not relying on a punchline. It's actually showing you, this type of unique story. And I think overall it's a fun time. So that's why
Mhm.
I decided to choose that one.
Yeah, I remember when you brought this one up. I was like, I'm in. The first thing that came to mind was like, okay, VHS viral plus haunted mask. I mean, how is that not fun? I actually was able to check this one out, and yeah, it's everything I wanted it to be, which is pretty sound. Like, I mean, you got a school play, you got some active participation going on in the plot with some sort of focus and mystery that the kids have to solve. You have an actual threat with a unique monster that a lot of fans probably really dig the concept in Doctor Strange movies. Or if you've seen the VHS viral segment that we're talking about, you probably vibe with that if you like it. Um, this just imagine that for kids horror.
Mhm.
I don't know how else to tell you. You get the best of both worlds. You get some goosebumps. You get some out there like comic booky idea, and it really does work. I like the fantasy aspect. I think out of all the episodes we're actually going to talk about today, this is probably one of the most lighthearted ones in comparison. But there are some moments that, holy crap, if they actually pull that off with like, there's like a strangulation scene, that would be crazy. But yeah, I mean, yeah, great pick to put on this list. Yeah. Um, moving on to number 5. Okay, um, fifth round draft pick here. So this story I actually found originally in a short story collection that um, I had in my collection. I think it's called "Great Writers and Kids Write Spooky Stories." And I realized that the story was also included in a book released by what is his name, Bruce Covell, and it's called Book of Aliens 2. And this story that's in there is written by a guy named Rick Hotala. That um, I've been reading more and more and more of his stuff over the years. I've talked about Goblin Boy in the past, about it that being like basically like his take on Haunted Mask, and really enjoying that. Here, in this story that he provided, this is basically a reimagining on what we got in Afraid of Clowns episode. And if you've seen the episode and you hear about the story, you pretty much know where I'm going with it. This story is called Abduction. And it's essentially about this kid who is starting to suffer from some severe headaches, and he can't really get rid of them nor explain their origins. um, and throughout the story, we get a sense of like his day to day life, and how these headaches are starting to like kind of make him see stuff that he doesn't know is there. And without getting into too many details and getting into heavy, heavy spoilers, because it's very easy to spoil this one. Essentially, um let's just say some men in black people get involved, and there's like this whole like alien conspiracy element that the character is introduced to that starts to make him question like his own reality, let's just say, which is carried throughout the story until the very end, where there's a big bombshell revelation about um, let's say the origins of this kid, why the source of his headaches, and basically what's going to become of his future. Now, in the heart of it, now that I kept that part pretty much pushed to the side because I didn't want to get too much into it, there's a resonating theme in this story, and I've said it many, many, many times about My Harry's Adventure. And what that book should have been is a story about preservation, humanistic preservation, if you get my drift. Because what I'm getting at is there is a sense of losing your humanity, losing your human identity, wanting to have that over what you really are, and how existential that could be in thought, and how hair raising that could be and eerie really does come out of this story by the end of it. This is probably one of the more punchline heavy stories, but I think if they pulled the tact of the short story off in an episode, I think it would scar people. And especially if they had a good kid actor selling the dread of the realization that they learn and what's going to become of them, I think people would probably cry because of how harrowing that is. Um, and I know you read it, Horrorlander, so like you probably definitely echo it the sentiment. Like this is basically Afraid of Clowns episode, but turned up into something more serious, something more, I guess, disgusting when you think about it. But yeah, it's awful but great at the same time. Not necessarily like in bad taste, but it's like awful that this is happening to this person.
Yeah, I mean, this is like based. I was just gonna say this is basically like a variant of Afraid of Clowns episode. So if you guys like that idea of like what's your identity, again that preservation angle, this has all of that except it's with a bit of I think crazier body horror. All right, this is gonna be a more effective, I guess, visually stunning story. And again, it's like Afraid of Clowns meets Men in Black. So that's in itself is a very fun idea.
Yeah, if you like the Men in Black from Don't Go to Sleep, just imagine them coming back
The
one
reality
time
police.
only. Reality Police is coming back one time only for abduction. I think a majority of people out there would probably vibe with this story. And you'll see the comparisons, but this is one of the examples where this is like a loose, soft remake of a similar idea. Just I think is just a better one of that previous idea.
It also has
Um,
those perfect brother nodes of like, do you really know what's going on? So people will like that.
yeah, it has that effective twist angle, especially if you're of the untrained variety. You probably won't see this coming. So there you go. Now moving on to our sixth draft pick. This is another one that I think I threw out into the ether, and this story I actually came across from a fellow named Al Antonio. I had bought this book a few years back called Toy Box, and I was reading through it, and I realized very quickly that all the stories in Toy Box, which is a book I guess made for adults, were all centered around kid protagonists. And I'm like, okay, well that's kind of a red flag because there is a difference between kids horror and then adult horror made with kid protagonists, right? But a lot of the stories in there, I think, actually felt more haunting hour in nature. And this one story, I think, is one of his most well-known stories. If you know about Alice Antonio, you probably have read this one before because it's been put in a various amount of collections now at this point. It's called The Man with Legs. And you're probably like, oh, God, what is this story about? Yeah, this is one that I think could be potential nightmare fuel. This is also another, I guess, pseudo remake, but kind of a mashup at the same time. If you're a fan of Dreamcatcher and if you're a fan of Fear Never Knocks, this will probably itch a scratch on both regards here for you. It goes there, trust me. But this story is more cautionary in element. And it has a very simple premise. I forget the exact details of how these kids ended up at this house. I can't remember if it's a dare or they decided to just randomly go there. I can't remember the exact details,
It was
but
like the girl saw it on the she saw a person from a window on the way home from a bus ride, so she
oh,
had.
okay. So she saw a person in the window, and I guess they want to prove that somebody's in the house, right? So these two young kids, they end up going to this house where this, like Horlander said, the girl saw somebody in the window, and they end up making their way into the house, and let's just say, the domino effect of spoilers can happen here because it's very easy. But all I'm going to say is think about the title, Man with Legs, right? Think about something like a room in the house with a collection of legs, right? And it's basically revealed to these kids that these legs have the power of manifestation to become the living embodiment of what you fear most, right? Does that remind you of Fear Never Knocks? Because it sure does for me. The gut punch, though, is this is definitely a be careful what you wish for, like Tales from the Crypt, EC Comics type of morality play here. But the kids learn the hard way that snooping around something, isn't always the thrills and the chills. Sometimes it means imminent doom. In the case of a certain character involved, and then of course at the chagrin of the other character, by the end, we learn kind of like in a stinger ending kind of way of what's going to become of them. What I think they can easily do to actually, I guess, make this episode even more fleshed out is build onto the ending. Now, I'm not saying go too far with it, but I do think there is a scenario where they can build onto it and maybe soften the blow. They could possibly save a certain character. Maybe they can go keep it dark. Um, I'm down for either. I'm just That's the only thing I would actually tweak with the episode. Everything else I think would scare the living crap off of kids. Especially if they had a good actor that had no legs, like playing up this, like, I guess new interpretation of fear. Maybe they can even have the same guy come back and apply that it is the same guy. That actually would be a cool meta thing. The man with no legs, or the man with legs is just fear. That'd be cool. I don't know how they would make that work, but I'm open for it. But yeah, this one is just it's nightmare fuel. It's going to stick with you probably, and that's the point. We're trying to push the envelope, but not too much. We're trying to scare the children, just not trying to make them not go to sleep for weeks. So, or maybe that could happen from this. I don't know. But this is one of the ones that I think would provide some like legitimacy to this reboot. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no. This is one story that I remember when Comp recommended. I had no idea what was going to happen in the story, and then I read it, and I was like, "Yeah, this needs to be in Haunting Hour. This is definitely going to be something that will scare kids." Because it is by an adult horror author, it has something that I think is missing from kids horror. Because I've read a few adult horror stories like where the Angels Come In by Adam Neville, and there's a few stories by Tim Curran, like The Puppet Maker and stuff, where it's the idea of people walking into like a madhouse of horrors, and that's what the kids deal with here. They basically walk in to a straight up madhouse of horrors, and it's very similar to Pumpkinhead, where kids should not have been snooping where they shouldn't have. They end up snooping, and they end up finding crazy stuff. And the reveal scene in this story is crazy. So for all of you guys out there who are curious, please read it. You will see what we are implying. I also, if you guys like the idea of shape shifting, this is a really cool take on shapeshifting. I mean, there are some messed up places that this shapeshifting story goes in terms of psychological warfare, emotional warfare. Yes, there is some things that happen to the kids which are not implied physical. They're more so deception and things like that. So yeah, it's really cool tale. And I think the man with legs, or in some cases the man without legs, is going to be probably one of the most terrifying villains in kids horror, especially if they have the budget to show some disturbing visuals, like a particular climax scene. And I'll leave it at that.
Oh yeah. I mean, if they're able to pull that off and get away with it, I think they can pull off a lot of these like darker tone ones. That I think actually go a little bit farther. But where this one ends, like I said, like there's plenty of room to keep it going if they want to. So, um, but as is, yeah, absolute nightmare fuel, absolute nightmare fuel, and yeah, that's why it's a shoe in on this revival. We're trying to up the ante a little bit. All right, so we're making some groundwork here. We're at draft pick number 7, and this is the first and only remake suggestion. We have a remake suggestion. Now, this remake actually comes from a story that was released, I think, in the early 1980s. It was made in the Tales from the Dark Side TV show in its final season. We've actually covered it on the podcast on Goose Junkies in the past. I've actually made um, a few bits of content surrounding it by itself. And the story is written by a fellow named Thomas F. Monteleone, which I don't think has the richest bibliography ever. But he's most well known for this story because of the Tales from the Dark Side. And this is actually a fan favorite episode for a lot of people from the show. And it's called The Cuddy Black Sow. Now, if you're familiar with the Tales from the Dark Side episode, you probably recognize it as being like kind of like a platinum age kids horror tale. This is before Goosebumps and Are You Afraid of the Dark. But the short story it's based on, I think, is actually a little bit darker than the episode because it's syndicated television, and plus it's involving kids. Maybe they had some sort of like, I don't know, wish wash opinion about how to go about that back in the day. But for me, I think really the only reason why I want to see this one remade is because this story takes place entirely on Halloween and Halloween Eve. And the point of this remake would be to actually bring Halloween into the forefront of it, right? The original episode, it was basically all inside of the house. For the most part, that's what the short story is too. But I see the idea of expansion here, following the kids as they leave the house in the story and getting to see the Halloween atmosphere, being stalked by a monster that's already prevalent in the story, and then keeping, I guess, a similar climax and a similar ending, or maybe adding on to the climax to actually bring in the monster. But all the story is about these two young children who have their sick and dying grandmother in the beginning of the story, about to breathe her last breath the day before Halloween. And the grandmother, in her delirium, tells our young protagonist that it's up to him to listen to her warning about the Cuddy Black Sow, who's going to come for her soul on Halloween night if she passes that day. And sure enough, she passes that day. So the next day, the Cuddy Black Sow is going to come for her grandmother's soul, but the boy has been gifted instructions by his grandmother to help prevent that, and it involves some stones he has to leave in the fireplace that are marked. But if you know the story, he becomes marked himself by the Cuddy Black Sow once his stone falls out of the fire. And basically from there he feels like he's going to become the next victim of the Cuddy Black Sow, but he thinks it could be all in his imagination and none of it's real. But he finds out by the end it is real. That's just the story. But like I said, if you add those bits of actually having him leave the house and go out trick or treating with his little sister, get that Halloween atmosphere, feeling like he's being stalked by the Cuddy Black Sow, and actually having a climax at the house, maybe like a Kevin McAllister kind of thing, where he sets some booby traps for it, or maybe catches it and thinks that he defeated it, but he gets out and gets him, cat and mouse. I think this is a shoe in for Haunting Hour. I think this would be like a very cool Halloween folk legend based story. You don't see that often in Haunting Hour. I mean, the Golem was one from the original show, and not many others. This one, I think, has the biggest potential out of pretty much all of these stories because it's remaking a classic episode, and it's pretty easy to just take what that episode did and improve on it where it was lacking. So yeah, that's why I put it on here. This is one that I think feels the most like Haunting Hour out of some older stuff that I guess is eligible to be remade.
Yeah, I think this is a great pick just because, like you mentioned, it's a Halloween story. It's a folklore kind of horror story, which I think is like needed in the show. We talked about, I mentioned Adam Neville. Adam Neville's a big folklore and adult horror stuff, and he's got a couple, stories called like The Cunning Folk and The Pig Thing. And let me tell you, folks, The Cuddy Black Sow is going to be a terrifying monster. If they do the makeup effects right, if they get the effects on it, it is straight up scary. It is straight up nightmare fuel. And the fact that a kid has to deal with it is high stakes. And again, I love the Halloween aspect. So yeah, I think it's a great pick. And the fact that it comes from the Platinum age, it'll be nice seeing it with a modern kind of twist. So yeah, overall, I think it works.
Yeah, keeping that one short and sweet. If you haven't seen the Tales from the Dark Side episode, that
Yeah.
might be a good introductory point for you. You can go watch that, and you can see the potential at a remake that we were bringing up here. But yeah, that's why it's on here.
Mm.
So number 8, I think we're gonna shoot back to Fright Time, and we're gonna pass it over to Horrorlander. Horrorlander had found two really solid picks for this list, and they're pretty much more comic inspired in nature. Both of these,
Mm.
so yeah, I'm dying to hear him share them with you.
So the first one I'm going to talk about, well, first of all, let me clarify. Both of these stories are by the same author, right? This is an underrated female kids horror author who I think does great work. And the first one I'll talk about is because it's a Halloween story. So we just talked about Cuddy Blackcell. This is also a Halloween one, and it's one you won't forget because it has fantastic body horror in it. And I will say this. For a Halloween story, yes, it has even greater body horror than The Haunted Mask and The Haunted Mask 2. So, what is this story? This story is It's Really Me by Shannon Donnelly. To keep it short, It's Really Me is basically about this kid who is in love with Halloween because his dad is a special effects makeup and costume designer for movies that come out. So he naturally is working on a bunch of different effects. You have the kid testing out his different costumes on his mom, trying to scare her, but she's used to the antics and the banter between the father and the son. But the son has this urge, right? Because the father kind of wants to be that mentor figure, keep on making costumes for the kid. But the kid has that drive in him, right? He wants to make his own costume. He wants to make a costume that could impress his dad. He's looking for his dad's validation. And as he has this thought, he ends up getting chosen to go out and get some wood for the fire. And it's basically like a few days before Halloween, or maybe the day before. And as he's out in the backyard by the woods, trying to go get some firewood, he ends up reaching under a log and getting bit by something. And when he gets bit by this thing, very quickly some effects start coming in. He actually starts having some body horror, which is in the form of he starts having tree bark start growing over his skin. And he feels insects and ants crawling under the bark. He's freaked out. He has roots that start growing out of his fingernails and all types of crazy stuff. And it's very quickly spreading like a rash. And because of the fact that it is, a couple of days before Halloween, and the fact that he keeps on testing costumes because his dad is a special effects makeup artist, nobody believes him. Everything, everyone kind of believes that this is a part of his costume. Maybe he's working on something. The dad is impressed. The mom is impressed. The kids at school are impressed because they come to dress up at school on Halloween day. And yet he can't convince anybody that this is not actually a costume. He's actually getting affected. And it gets super disturbing. The body horror gets to some crazy levels as he starts having limited movement, limited speech. He starts transforming into basically a walking tree and living plant. And he has to find a way to basically discover what caused him to have this transformation and find a way to solve it. And it may lead to a graveyard where he finds out that there might be some other entities which are responsible. This is the perfect amount of weird and yet fantastic execution. I mean, it is such a strange story. If you heard anybody tell you this story, they'll be like, "What the hell are you talking about?" But when you read the story and see the execution, it is so much fun. I mean, you have the idea of a dad being a special effects makeup artist. Really cool concept. It hypes up the idea of becoming something you're not on Halloween. You have a kid who is very much relatable because he's a horror fanatic and he looks up to his dad. He wants that parental validation. He wants to kind of impress somebody that he looks up to. And being in this situation where nobody believes him because he's obsessed with making costumes. The body horror, y'all, in this story is insane. All right, I briefly described it about bark coming over the skin, there being ants and different insects crawling under the bark so he feels it on his skin. There's this rotted, corpse smelling kind of like sap that starts oozing out of him and all these crazy things. And, at some point he like tries to move and there's like roots that are like ripping out of the soles of his sneaker. It is like almost like the cover of the Tim Jacobitz version of Stay Out of the Basement, right? Some similar stuff to that. So it's really great. It's really fun. The way that it resolves is kind of heartfelt, but at the same time, it is disturbing in terms of implications. And overall, it's just going to be a super memorable tale. And again, I think this is some of the best body horror done in kids horror. And the fact that it's on Halloween, I mean, come on, you got stuff like the Haunted Mask too that people really fell in love with. So I think this would be pretty much an instant classic.
Hmm. Yeah, I was about to say, it reminds me of that quote from Haunted Mask. I'm supposed to be me, but I'm not, right? That's why the title's It's Really Me.
Mm.
But yeah, I read this one and yeah, it really reminded me of like plant horror and kids horror being like a niche thing. This is another plant horror story. So you got like basically a stay out of the basement haunted mask 2-esque mashup, which is pretty cool. And I agree that the setup is very unique and weird, but it adds to the disbelief of the story where you can set it aside, be like, oh, like that makes sense why kids would just ignore his pleas. But like the the idea of like slowly losing yourself to something that you can't control is kind of like the inverse of abduction, where you're trying to preserve your humanity. Here it's similar, he's trying to preserve himself, but at the same time it's more like he's trying to prevent himself not becoming what he is, what he's becoming, which adds a different layer to that body horror, right? Similar tones, just different ways of executing a similar idea. And I think context does matter here. And this also being set on Halloween, we could have a Halloween double feature, if this would air on Tubi. Tubi presents Cuddy Black Sow and It's Really Me, like Halloween double feature. Kids would eat this up. I hope not like the ants under his bark, but
No.
don't eat that. But at least eat the candy and like hide under the covers while you're watching it. An idea like this as a kid would have been like something I would have died for.
Yeah, it's also really messed up because the fact that he wants to
Yeah.
make the most impressive costume and the idea of special effects makeup artist, and he gets his wish, but be careful what you wish for. It depends
Yep.
on how you get it. So,
That's why I said
um,
it feels more comic book in nature because this is something you would find in like old EC comics. So, especially this next one, which is our ninth round pick, and this is also another one proposed by Mr. Horlander here. So, take us away on that one too.
yeah, this one is another one by Shannon Donnelly, and the way I will pitch this is basically like a certain creep show segment that is very famous and very iconic, but tailored for kids with some adjustments. This is Some Things in the Sewer by Shannon Donnelly. This story is basically about this kid who you find out has a what's deemed to be very overactive imagination. And his little brother is complaining to the mother, saying that, hey, my big bro is trying to scare me. He's trying to tell me that there's gators in the sewer. So you get the imply that this over imaginative kid is trying to pick on his little brother. But from internal monologue and some context, you find out that that's not actually what he's doing. He's actually trying to, in an indirect fashion, scare his little brother and keep him away as far as he can from sewers without telling him the reason why. And the reason why is because every time this kid goes to school and comes back from school, in his typical, walking fashion, he ends up passing this street called like Fifth and something Avenue. And when he passes this avenue, he swears by the life of him that there is something strange down in the sewers that is almost unexplainable because anytime he goes by there, he hears this very loud, abnormal slurping noise. Sounds like when you're at like the bottom of a glass and you're slurping it up, amplified. He smells something which smells like rotten eggs mixed with watermelon sour candy. Really nasty, decaying type of smell. And he can hear something moving down in the sewers from manhole to manhole. So he suspects that there might actually be something down there that is actually actively hunting him and targeting him. And he thinks he might be crazy. He thinks that, you know what, I believe it, but there's no one who can back me up or believe me. But on the way, back home from school, he ends up finding a kid who he sees is actually studying the sewer drains, is actually studying the manholes. And after striking up some dialogue, he ends up finding out that this kid has actually been studying the sewers for the same reason that he's picked up, that he thinks that something's down there, and he might have actually seen it. And together, the two kids strike up a sort of makeshift bond. They become friends, and they start investigating and trying to find out what's down there. And it may end up getting very crazy. You may find out that based off of some milk cartons and some missing children, that there have been children taken on that avenue by this entity, and it might be up to them to solve the mystery of these missing children, as well as finding out a way to solve the threat. So this one is effectively the raft for kids, because the entity in this story is pretty much the raft, right? It's that type of entity. If you've seen the raft, I don't want to spoil, but go watch the raft or maybe go do some research. You can find out what I'm talking about. But yeah, that entity is basically down in the sewer. It's very intense, very scary. The idea that you don't know what's down there initially, and there's chase sequences. There's sequences where the kid's running for his life, and he's trying to, like, almost like a football player, avoid like a sewer drain by sewer drain because he hears that thing rushing up there and trying to get him. The idea that there's missing children. There is some very, and I mean very disturbing visuals when they have to go down into the sewer and actually seeing what this thing is doing to children. I'm just gonna leave it at that. It gets pretty crazy. And on top of that, there's a reveal, which I'm not gonna say what happens, but it's essentially like the climax to the movie segment, The Raft. But think of something even wilder. Think of something even crazier, and that's how this thing comes out and attacks people. And I think it's a very cool segment. I think it's very fun. I think that it's the right mixture of terrifying, disturbing, and at the same time very comic book feeling. And the Raft for Kids sounds like something that just needs to exist. So that's why I picked it.
Yeah, I mean, I have always loved the Rav segment from Creepshow 2. And I think what makes that story pop and resonate with so many fans out there that have watched Creepshow 2 over the years is for the sheer fact that there is no known to the monster. All we do know is its modus operandi, and that is it's motiveless and it kills and it's after people, right? That's what makes it scary, right? And that's sometimes all that you need in a good creature feature is something like a blob monster coming out of the woodwork, chasing people down, and trying to save everybody else in the situation. It's a throwbacky kind of story, very 1950s, but I love it for that. you know, and honestly, this is one where if you wanted to kind of make it like they want to do kind of like a if Haunting Hour wanted to theme each episode based on how they kind of like vibe, like if you want to have like certain effects that kind of feel like comic panels, I would totally get that art direction if they want to get artsy fartsy with it. Um, but yeah, solid pick, very solid pick for this list because yeah, I mean, monsters in the sewer coming after you, and the whole angle about the brother trying to be a jerk just to protect him. Hey, we got Brian O'Connor here, right? Well, here we go. Yeah, yeah. Nothing else to say on that one. Um, Now moving on to number 10. This one actually comes from a comic I've covered in the past called House of Fear. This story is written by James Powell, who wrote majority of that series, and has gone on to do some other things in kids horror too. So if you're looking out for some stuff to read, he's got like a story I think called The Wishing Stone and Santa's Dark Legacy, which seem to have some pretty good reviews out there. So I personally can't wait to check them out. But this story, I think, without a doubt, is the best story from House of Fear. If there was going to be one to get made, it is going to be this story. It just feels the most whole. It feels more traditional comics, kind of like It's Really Me and Sewer. This can fit right in with those because it was a comic. And it's called Teeth. Now, you might be like, Teeth? All right, where's this going? Well, probably think a tooth fairy. So, yeah, that's basically what we're getting here. But the dynamic here is kind of like it's hard to describe, but I'll try to describe it as best as I can. It's about this pair of siblings who are a bit younger in age. This would be, I don't know if they would go with these ages for kids, but maybe they could. And let's just say one of them loses a tooth, which prompts the older sibling to get involved. And one night where she thinks she hears something in the bedroom, and it turns out the tooth fairy's there. Right now, the tooth fairy is not what you think. It's not Tinkerbell. It's not like Disney's version of what a fairy looks like. This thing looks like a old hag, decrepit wings, yellowish eyes, is sunken, like facial features, rotted teeth, and you're like, what the hell is this, man? Like, what? Just the idea of the monster just being as is, as it was depicted in the comic panels, would be enough to scare most young children. But essentially, the girl takes it upon herself to um, take care of try to take care of the tooth fairy, and you find out by the end with a twist where that's going to go. This is also another one very easy to spoil, so I'll keep it brief. But yeah, teeth is one that I think it's mostly just in the small scale nature of it, right? That makes it work. It's so cozy feeling. It's set in a house. Not a lot of stories we have touched so far take place entirely inside of a house for the most part, but this one I think kind of fits that nature of it. Really does remind me of a movie that I got you to watch that you really liked, like Don't Be Afraid of the Dark. It
Hmm.
has that nature to it, where in that story I think it was about bone eating trolls that
Well,
live under.
actually, it was the
Or
Fae
it was
that
the
came.
Fae, bone eating fairies, or whatever they were. They lived under the house, right? Here you
Hmm.
had the same idea, kind of, except you had the tooth fairy. Um, and like the mystery and them coming after like family members and stuff makes it more personal, makes it more cerebral. And I think that's why it works so well for me, is that sibling bond, that coming over pretty much like a villain that has supernatural origins, that should be unstoppable in theory, but the kids have to rise to the occasion and put a stop to it. You get that typical like heroic moment for the kids, or attempted to be heroic. Maybe if it's against their will or within their will, it doesn't necessarily matter. But yeah, I think the twist also is very effective. If I remember correctly, what the twist was, that was pretty good. That would be interesting to see how they would pull that off in the show. Um, but yeah, home run, knockout, throw it in there, kind of story.
Yeah, I absolutely love this story. It ended up getting a 10 out of 10 perfect for me. I love the small scale nature. I love the idea of, the unassuming, these kids think that, the mom is favoring, one kid over another because she got a new job, that she's paying one, more money. And because of that, they end up finding out the reality about an urban legend, right? Again, for any of you out there, House of Fear Volume 1 is on Amazon. You can buy it, you can get it digitally or physical, and check it out. Please go read the story because the artwork of the Tooth Fairy is genuinely horrific. She is aura farming the whole story. It is, again, like Com said, this very decrepit hag. Looks like the Crypt Keeper from the old EC comic images, but kind of a little bit more scarier. This Baba Yaga kind of haggish woman. And the things that she does, the way that she acts, and the idea that this is a very ancient entity which is dealing with the changing of guard, maybe trying not to get replaced and trying to keep the job, even though her body and her personality are a little bit rotten and spoiled by this point to stay around. It is such a great story. So, yeah, this one has
Yeah.
to be done. And please keep a faithful design. Please, to your best of ability, keep a faithful design to what James Powell had as the comic art.
I mean, if Creepshow could do it with the companion and keep it
Mm,
faithful, please just keep Teeth faithful.
yes,
That's all I ask.
yes. And Creepshow has a Tooth Fairy story too, I think called Baby Teeth. So there you go. You got the
Yeah,
kids horror
that's
equivalent.
yeah. It could be Kids Horror's version of Creepshow's Baby Teeth. There you go. That's actually a good comparison.
Hmm.
Yeah. You know, so far we're 10 for 10. We still got looks like six more picks. So we have
Hmm.
draft pick number 11. This actually goes back over to you, Horrorlander. This is a story that you really wanted to see done. So why don't you tell everybody about it?
Yeah, so this is one that I picked because the short story was, quite frankly speaking, too short for the concept. I love the concept. I love the setup to the short story. It needs more room to grow. And what better than for a Haunting Hour adaptation where they can expand it, maybe make it into a two-parter? And it is a coming-of-age story that really stuck with me. It is from the Scary Stories for Sleepover short story collections that were apparently very popular during the 90s. I looked on Wikipedia, these used to sell like millions of copies, so very popular, and it had so many spin-off series. This story is called The Pact by QL Pierce. Now, QL Pierce is probably the most famous author, female author from the series. And the pact is basically about these group of three girlfriends, right? And they live in Louisiana. The main, I guess, leader of the group unofficially is named Char. She lives in the Louisiana bayou by the swamps. And they grow up hanging out there. They explore the swamps. They kind of use it as like a hangout zone, investigate wildlife, find cool spots. And the grandma of Char basically tells them like spooky stories about the swamp. And one of the biggest stories about the swamp is basically this lizard man who's said to live in the swamp and devour snakes, devour alligators, and even devour people. And apparently, the local people of this Louisiana section of the swamp all have stories about it. And I forgot the name. I think its name is Lakoti the lizard man. So these kids grow up, with these type of stories. But what ends up happening is that one of the girls has a military dad who has to effectively move away because he has to go to different bases. And another girl has to end up moving as well for family reasons. And only Char, the local girl, is left behind. So what they do is they end up making basically an unofficial blood pact that 5 years later down the line, they will, no matter what happens in their life, meet up at this very same spot in the Louisiana swamp that they grew up in. And they will basically reconvene and hang out with each other. And what ends up happening is that over the span of these 5 years, the letters start decreasing, and the two girls who moved away do eventually end up getting back to that spot in the swamp. But the local girl, Char, ended up having some family problems. Her mother and grandmother actually ended up dying in a car accident, so she's actually with some foster relatives, so they don't think that she's going to come. And eventually, what happens is that when they get there, they have a little bit of a nostalgia that comes back to them, but not good nostalgia. Let's just say an urban legend that they heard about might actually have some validity and ends up turning into some life stake kind of reasons. It might end up with their lives on the line. They have to run for safety, and a certain character ends up coming and helping them out. And it ends up being quite a heartwarming story where they reconvene, and their friendship is truly reinforced by the end of the tale. Now, this story was cut way too short, but I think this is a fantastic premise. I mean, this is a coming of age, heartfelt story about some kids coming together. Similar type of things you would see in like, Stephen King's It or, Summer of Night by Dan Simmons and all these different places. The fact that these friends have to grow apart due to family reasons is very relatable. The fact that they all have stuff going on in their lives and yet they end up making time for each other is very nice. And I think that this will be something that if well executed, some people might even get like teary eyed. They might feel the emotions of this episode and resonate with them. And the idea of this urban legend about Lakoti, this lizard man in the swamp, being a sort of vehicle that puts their friendship on the line and makes them come together, I think is very cool. It's a swamp story. It reminds you of like how to kill a monster from Goosebumps. So that's why I wanted to pick it, mainly because it can be expanded upon. And I think out of all the stories on this list that can end up being too dark and maybe a little bit too dreary for some people, this will bring some light while at the same time having good creature feature and some good action to it.
Yeah, I mean, from the sound of it, I wasn't able to read this one, but I do think that when you have a mostly dark show, that it's good every once in a while to have like something with more like heartfelt substance to it than just like if we're just trying to scare kids. Yeah, that's our job. Um, I liked it when Tales from the Crypt did it. I like it when Goosebumps does it. I like it when all the shows do it. And I think The Pact, from what you described, easily could be one of those stories that kind of transcend the genre a bit. Like if they're able to expand on it in an impactful way, it can come across like a good movie quality if they really wanted to. Um, the sound of it does remind me of this movie I've seen called The Legend of Gatorface,
Mm.
and I'm not sure if that would execution would what it would kind of look like. But I would hope not, because Gatorface's monster is atrocious looking. This was a Canadian '90s movie, so uh, Lord forbid, right?
Hopefully this one looks more like a Zorgon or something cool.
Yeah, hopefully they get a good lizard design for this. And it also kind of reminds me of that element from You Can't Scare Me, where like
Mhm.
you had that urban legend of the Lakota, you got the mud monsters. It kind of reminds me of that when like they show up, like the way they show up, right? But I do like the pact idea. I do like friends coming together under a promise, under an oath, and trying to honor that commitment, right? And then seeing that through. That's a powerful message, to show that like, hey kids, there's many ways you can show that you care about your friends, and you know, if they're able to make people shed a tear, then I think that's a good thing. It's just as good as to make people like care emotionally about something than it is to make people scared to death of something in a show like this.
And with the powerful friendship tale under, life-threatening stakes and horror, it very much would be like the next creature feature, right? That could very much be the type of
Yeah,
potential in terms of the messaging. So,
yeah. Or you can consider this like what You Can't Scare Me should have been.
yeah, pretty much.
You can look at it like that. I think actually you have just enough characters to actually try to pull that off if they wanted to. Come on, R.L. Stein, what are you doing? Why you got all these guys writing their ideas
Instead
better?
of instead of you can't scare me, it's you can't separate me. That's
You
what it
can't
is.
separate me. There you go. That's the new title. Wow. So I feel weird, coming off this emotional, heartfelt pick because this next one, is arguably the darkest story here. I actually found this one in Scary Stories for Sleepovers book two. I think it was in book six with like the vampire on the cover, and I was reading through it, and I saw the title of this one. I never heard of the author. It's a guy named Don Wolfson. I know he's done kids horror short story collections in the past. I think he did quite a few. I might have been involved in Scary Stories for Stormy Nights too. But this one, it caught my eye, and immediately I thought of two things. I thought about, oh crap, this reminds me of Scarecrow Walks at Midnight, but it also reminds me of a story that a lot of Haunting Hour fans really love. And we already kind of mentioned it before, Pumpkinhead. So it's kind of like a perfect marriage of those stories, but with a whole new twist. And if you throw in a dash of like Yellow Jacket Summer by Robert McCammon, and maybe a dash of Why I'm Afraid of Bees. You can kind of pick up where I'm putting down here. But this story is called Wax Coffins. Now the title you might be like wax. We're talking about beeswax, all right. So this is going to involve some bees, but not in the way you probably think. It goes out there with it. This story's about a girl who is visiting her grandparents out in the rural part of the country, and she decides to take it upon herself to kind of do like a report or expose almost on this local place that I guess generates honey. But she gets this bad vibe from this guy that runs this place. He's starting to ring some alarm bells like Farmer Palmer does in Pumpkinhead, right? So she takes it upon herself to start perusing, poking and prodding her nose in places that shouldn't be poking and prodded in. And curiosity kills the cat at the end of the day in every morality story, right? So what ends up happening to this girl, as you can expect, is that she ends up on this property. She uncovers some information she was not expecting to find out, uncovers some motives, and essentially gets her in a situation where she has some creatures pretty much forced on her. And by creatures, I mean giant, like bees almost. And it's revealed in like I want to say a Deus Ex Machina, but like in like a twist you probably don't think is coming, but like it does come, and it's essentially like uh, think Jeff Goldblum's The Fly. And I'll just leave it there. Yeah, and I can't go further, but if you've seen Queen Bee from Creepshow and you've seen that ending, apply that here. Just a little bit farther because it involves kids. Okay, so this one is just like, what if Pumpkinhead involved insects and just pushed it a little further? That's all this story is. Now, some people might be like, you cannot do this ending because if you read the ending, you're like, holy crap. And I get you to a degree. You would have to cut it off because Dreamcatcher had this scenario in Haunting Hour, right? You know that little girl at the end of Dreamcatcher got eaten by that guy. Everybody knows that's what's implied, but they cut it off before you see it happen. Here, um, like it's told to you, but you start to see the process of what's going on a little bit, just a little bit. Um, like if they were to do this in the episode, like they would they can probably cut it off with the screams, but I can definitely see parents complaining about this one if I to Tubi if if they released it as is. So I would recommend just pulling back the ending just a tad. But other than that, this one's pretty much good to go. I mean, I don't know how they would pull off the insects, but with modern CGI, it's doable. They can cut corners on some places, make some practical, and then CGI the rest. But yeah, this one shocked me. I think this one would literally scare the pants off of children.
Yeah, I mean, this one is one that I was shocked when I got to the ending, especially like, oh my god, this thing went there. That's crazy. I think this one could definitely have some stuff tweaked, but still done in the climax. If you've seen the movie, which is in Haunting Hour, called Don't Think About It, there's a scene involving the layer of the monster and some things that pretty much could be kind of replicated here. You could have some puppets made on these giant bees or some larvae or some crazy things, some of the wax process. And there is a adult horror story, which, if you would have told me that there was a kids horror equivalent to this that existed, I would have looked at you crazy, which is there's a story by Tim Curran called Bride of the Termites, which is so disturbing and so horrible. And if you told me that was for kids, I'd be like, yeah, they'll never do that. I lied. Wax coffins exist, and it went there, and it's quite disturbing. So this is probably one of the most haunting ones, but with some adjustments, I think it can make it to TV, it can make it to screen, and definitely one that people will never forget. I will tell you that
Yeah.
up front.
Yeah, I have a hard confidence. Like if this were to get made, the hardcore original show fans would love this. They would
Yes.
love this one. Absolutely love it. So yeah, go read this story. It's in Scary Stories for Sleepovers 6. Okay. Um, Draft pick number 13. Now we're getting into some stories here in a row that came from a short story collection that I actually casually started to read a few years back, but I got a couple of my friends like you and Monster Blood to read recently. And everybody seems to be in agreement of their favorite stories in this collection, which is cool. But two of the stories I think are shoe in for this show. The one I want to talk about is one that I would actually turn into a two-parter. I think there's a lot of room with this story because it's one of those emotional ones, and there's experimental aspects to the story that I think would be very interesting to see introduced into a kids horror episode at the same time. But it's called Mr. Shockey, which is written by Michael Buckley, which was featured in Guys Read Terrifying Tales, book number 6. That's the book we're referring to. Um, and this story is it's emotional, it's eerie, and there's something about it that just sticks with you a little bit about it. It's about like an imaginary friend that gets forgotten by this older brother, or not necessarily forgotten, but like discarded because the kid no longer needed it, and essentially the imaginary friend decides to make its presence known and befriend the main character's little brother, and this brings back basically like repressed memories of this being named Mr. Shockey and their relationship together, and um, how off it really was. And I'm trying to avoid spoilers as much as possible. I'm trying to be vague, but essentially, the story essentially becomes about the older brother trying to save his little brother from this being. That's all I'm gonna leave it at. And where it ends, it at least sequel bait. This could be a franchise. Mr. Shockey could be like a new Lily D. Could be a new Pumpkinhead. I think he could honestly be a mascot for a new Haunting Hour, Mr. Shockey. with the man with legs. But yeah, Mr. Shockey, the imaginary friend that came to life. There's so much that they can do. I think the book actually depicted him in a certain way, which I think would be like really cool if they did it the book's way. I wish I had it on hand because I can show everybody what he looks like. I want to say he had a top hat. I want to say he did, but I can't remember if he did or not. Um, but yeah, this villain is very cerebral, very personal. This is a very personal story. You get that sense of the threat where it feels like it's like a personal attack. It just you remove that this could happen to anybody effect. This is very deliberate. If you're a fan of more cerebral stories, you're gonna like this one. And where I think it can expand on easily is going into not necessarily more of the mythos of Mr. Shockey, but making him more prevalent in like the back half of the story where he's already kind of prevalent and building on to that idea that the ending leaves off with like this isn't finished, this isn't over, right? This is something that he's going to have to continue to fight, right? It's not a happy ending whatsoever, but it's not like I want to say a terrible ending either. So, um, yeah, I'm trying. Like I said, I'm not trying to spoil the story because I want everybody to actually read these, so you can like get behind it. But yeah, I don't know what else to say about Mr. Shockey. Maybe Horrorlander could say something. But yeah, I love this one.
Yeah, I mean, this one has got really cool concept. It's the idea of weaponizing imaginary friends, basically.
Yeah.
The idea that there are, other type of entities that could, impersonate imaginary friends. There's lore behind it. It also reminds me of, actually, funny enough, a the Troop episode from the Nickelodeon show. I think the episode was called "No More Master Nice Guy," where this basically most dangerous cryptid that's invisible ends up attaching itself to a character that uses it to basically use it against bullies and weaponize it and stuff. So that invisible threat that can cause a lot of damage, cause a lot of problems going rogue. Very cool concept, and the reviews are quite cool. So yeah, this is a great one for a two-parter.
Yeah, like using weapons. You know, I think weapons by Zach Kreger kind of popularized this idea like unsuspecting weapons. I
Hmm.
think kids would probably like that comparison here too, but you can kind of correlate that. But yeah, Mr. Shockey, I don't want to give too much away about this one. I think this is one that um, you have to read it to understand the potential of a two-parter. Like you'll see it. Moving on to draft pick number 14 for the rest of these, it's actually going to be taken over by Mr. Horlander. We've got three here. This other one I think comes from Guys Read Terrifying Tales, so you can go ahead and talk about that one.
Yeah, I'm very glad you brought up Weapons by Zach Kreger because this is Weapons by Zach Kreger for kids horror. Yes, if you're a
Yes.
fan of Weapons, this is for that. This one has probably one of the best titles to any kids horror story. It is Licorice Needles by Nikki Lofton. Now, Licorice Needles is about this kid who essentially is kind of struggling when it comes to literature and reading. He's having a hard time with those type of classes. So he ends up basically getting some unofficial kind of tutorship lessons from this old lady who is blind in the neighborhood. The mom basically arranges that he goes to her house and basically takes reading lessons. And she seems like your normal old lady who gives them, sweets, gives them licorice, gives them different baked items. But what happens is that he notices as time goes on that she will interrupt reading sessions to basically give him three different pieces of items to read at certain intervals. There'll be like newspaper clippings, there'll be certain strange, kind of spells, what it seems like that she writes down her old, medieval type of literature, and then he'll have to read something else, like a strange poem or something. And this usually happens when somebody interferes with her life. It'll be like some kids, maybe on her lawn, littering. It might be somebody who caused her some problems in the past. And what he ends up finding out is that every time he finishes doing this little interruption and it kind of leaves his mind and he goes on with his day back to school, something strange will happen. There will be an occult phenomenon that happens to kids, which causes some accidents, such as a girl who ends up getting her hand into the meat grinder, yes, into the kitchen grinder at the bottom of the sink. There's something involving like lethal gases and all these different things. So very quickly he realizes by some context clues that these weird phenomenon happening to kids might actually be targeted because the phenomenon that happen actually sound very similar to some of the pieces of literature and writing that the teacher is making him read during these interruptions. And he very quickly realized that she might actually be weaponizing some supernatural abilities and using the kid as a medium to basically activate it. And he has to essentially find a way to kind of get himself out of the situation. But something happens, and he might find out that things are a little too late. And the title has a reason. That's all I'm gonna say. The title has a reason. It's a very great twist ending. I love this story. It's basically weapons for kids horror. The idea of this kind of witch-like character, which is lurking in the background, and again weaponizing kids. This kid is being weaponized and unintentionally being used as a medium to cause these supernatural things against people that she doesn't like. And she very quickly is like a spider. She's kind of like sewing her web across this entire neighborhood and kind of is dibble dabbling in different stuff. And even by the time the character figure out what's going on, it's not like he can go and rebel against this person. No, he kind of has to try to get his way out. And that might not be so easy. So, yeah, I love this story. It's a fantastic tale. Pretty much good to go. Some things just need to be implied and not really shown because it does get quite dark. And you do need to adjust the ending because I'm not going to lie, the ending is kind of crazy. But to be honest, you can still imply it. You just can't show certain things. But you might be able to show a few bumps on the body, and I'll leave it at that. You might be able to get
Yeah.
away with that.
This is one that I think um a lot of fans have kind of wanted with like stage fright and like other witch based stories, right? Where you have this like malevolent like boss bitch that comes out of the woodwork, gets some vengeance on kids. I've seen it so many times in kids horror where they attempted. I know Spine Tanglers tried it with Your Turn to Scream with like this magic game board, and there's been some other stories that I think there was an R.L. Stein story or somebody else had a similar story about like a malevolent witch that we were heavily considering, but we're like, this one's the best one. Like this one, it goes there, it elevates everything. Like if you like the description that Horlander shared about the story, I mean, literally, it goes. It's not afraid to mess up kids in this story. Would it show everything on screen? I no. It have to. Some stuff would have to be heavily implied. Like you said, the ending they would have to imply. They can't really show too much of it. Um, Granted, if they dare do the wax coffins ending, they can pretty much get away with anything here. But yeah, licorice needles. Yeah, this is a story that it will change your perspective on what a witch story could be. Like weapons did, like it revolutionized like witch stories, right? This was before weapons, and part of me thinks like it's in some weird way that the universe speaks good ideas out into the ether, and then they become mainstream eventually. This was birthed into the universe, and then Zach Kreger came along. But this would be like pretty much pitch perfect to what he said. It's weapons for kids. So if you like weapons, you're gonna love this probably.
Yeah,
Yeah,
very.
yeah. So the next one is actually an older story. This is probably the oldest story we have on here. I want to say. I think this comes from the 70s.
I
Oh,
believe so.
yes, from the 70s, and this is a throwback one from like a well-known horror author. We decided to go into deep pockets here for this one, deep cut right here. So yeah, share away.
Okay, so this one is actually from Shocker, an adult horror author who was very famous from the 70s and 80s. He wrote a lot of adult horror short story fiction, a lot of which has been considered or even used in anthology stuff. And this one I chose because we needed a Christmas story. We were trying to dig into what we could use for Christmas, and I read this story in the past, and I'm like, you know what? This could pretty much be used for a darker kids horror story because it has a kid protagonist in there without going into too much disturbing visuals necessarily. It is The Chimney by Ramsey Campbell. This one is basically about a kid who is really afraid of Christmas coming up, right? He's deathly afraid of the oncoming idea that Christmas is going to roll around. Because his parents are in love with it, all the kids around the neighborhood are as normal in love with Christmas, but he can't get over the fact that a lot of the sayings about Santa Claus, he sees you when you're sleeping, he sneaks into your house through the chimney. All of these are not appealing things when you think about it. Smart kid, just saying. This is some
Mhm.
scary stuff that could be implied with this entity, and he's very paranoid and afraid. And what ends up happening is that he actually starts getting potentially haunted by Santa Claus. And it might be an overactive imagination, but a lot of it is implied to be something is actually interfering and sounding with them. He sees and hears a lot of different crazy things. Like when he's in front of the chimney, he has like a furnace shield that he puts against it that his parents keep that he never wants to move. And he'll hear this deep rasping, right? Breathing. This is several months before Christmas has come, and he hears this loud breathing going on. As it gets closer to Christmas, the phenomenon keep increasing. He hears what sounds like centipede type of legs coming down the chimney, hundreds of legs. Right at one point, he's looking behind the furnace shield and he's kind of trying to see if he can find anything, and he sees an image. Which I think, if this is done in the show, it'll probably be one of the most biggest jump scare moments in the Haunting Hour franchise. Which is he looks into the dark abyss of this chimney and he sees looking back at him that jolly old fat ass Saint Nick is upside down, grinning ear to ear like the Joker with wide, crazy eyes and smiling at him with his pale face. And the kid leaps back afraid, right? And eventually he ends up going on vacation with his family and he gets back to his house. But now it's Christmas time. Now it's too late. And let's just say that on Christmas Eve, Christmas night, he ends up seeing the climax of all this anticipation. And it's not what he expected. It might be something more existential, might be something similar to Lake Mungo, if any of you guys have
Mhm.
seen that movie and know about the fear of the maybe future foreshadowing and stuff like that. So, yeah, The Chimney by Ramsey Campbell is a fantastic, very creative story dealing with the paranoia of a child, overactive imagination, fear behind certain urban legends, a lot of oncoming dread throughout the story. This is probably going to be filled with a lot of creepy moments that you have to decide, is it hallucination? Is it real? And the ending climax is dark, but not technically visually. You can get away with it visually. It's just the implications. Because let's just say that basically this entity of Santa shows the kid some real life tragic moment that was supposed to happen and it actually plays out, right? And what happens, I don't want to get into spoilers, might involve a family member. And maybe Santa Claus looks like that family member after a certain accident. Yeah, it goes there. And after that happens, the kid realizes that, this was not all, hallucination, that maybe Santa is something more cosmic and existential. So, yeah, I think this is a fantastic tale.
Yeah, this story, I'm a massive urban legend fan. Um, I know about the Daddy Santa and the Chimney urban legend. I think everybody's heard about that one. Um, it's like a little girl who has a dad who wants to surprise her as Santa Claus coming down the chimney, but he falls and breaks his neck. And then the following morning, the mom goes to start a fire, tugs on a boot, pulls down the body of the dead dad. Very similar origin, I think, or maybe inspiration for Ramsey Campbell's story here. Maybe it can be a little too dark for kids in some aspects, involving the context of it all. One little tweak I would actually suggest to make it a little more kid friendly is maybe offering maybe not the dad like actually being the element in the story. I'm not trying to get into too like I'm trying not to do spoilers, but I feel like for this specific one we kind of have to get into it. I feel like tweaking that and maybe making it actually be Santa Claus, like
Mhm.
just actually just making like, oh crap, I predicted, maybe I will this to be Santa. Like I didn't mean for Santa to die. Like and he lives with that guilt, and then you don't know what's gonna come. Um, or maybe if it's a psychosis, it could be one of those stories where you can play on like maybe like the idea of Fever Swamp, where there's two interpretations. They can have a dual interpretation add on to the ending where maybe he hallucinated it or maybe it did happen. I don't know.
Or if you
Um,
also want to avoid the Lake Mungo thing, just stick to Santa being a crazy entity, make it more creature
Yeah,
feature. Because it
yeah,
reminds me of actually another James Powell story called Santa's Dark Legacy. I think you can
yeah,
have some disturbing visuals like that. So
yeah. But the idea of being stalked, wasn't there an element where he was like watching a movie that scared him, and then like he associated like the movie, like something about the
I
movie with
believe
the chimney.
I believe it was the movie. Something happened, and also his mom read to him. I think the
Yeah.
jingle about he sees you when you're sleeping, and the kid, which is why I say it's one of the smartest kids. He hears this and he's like, "Wait a minute, this doesn't sound fun. This sounds creepy as all hell," and it just builds this sense of paranoia.
Yeah, I think maybe playing up that element, like maybe like Santa's coming after him because like he's like, wait, you're catching on to me. Like he could be
Right,
like
exactly.
you
That's
play
what's
on that
implied in
element.
the beginning. Yeah.
Yeah, that would make it a little more personable for the kid, and I think that would register a little bit more with kids out there watching.
And
Just like make it a little
it
more
would scare
personal.
people from Christmas for a long time. So I think that's very effective.
Yeah, that's the point. We're supposed to make kids afraid of Christmas. Okay, we don't want them to celebrate. We want them to avoid it.
That's the point.
Yeah. Um, God, I can't believe we're already down here to the last one here, but we got one more left. We did 16. It's kind of heavy on the recommendations, but a 16 episode season with a few two-parters, that does balance out to like 18 or so episodes. So, I think we're pretty much on the point of what a season would be, if we got the perfect world here. And our last pick actually goes to Horrorlander again. He found this one in a book collection. I think it's called "Don't Turn Out the Lights," which was an Alvin Schwartz, um, like I guess in
Tribute. Yeah.
memoriam book.
Yeah.
Like for scary stories to tell in the dark. Um, I haven't gotten around to reading this one. This is the other one I didn't get to read, but um, Orlando, take it away because I'm actually curious to hear what it's about.
Yeah, so far in this list, we've had creature features, we've had body horror, we've had aliens, we've had all these crazy cookie concepts. But you guys might be wondering, there's one thing you're missing, all right? You had scary Santa Claus. So what are we missing? A ghost story. We need a ghost story. But we need one that'll scare the life out of kids. Now, stay with me, people, because this is going to sound wild to you, but you're going to understand when I talk about the plot. This will be Hereditary for kids. And right away, people are going to be like, what did you just say? Let's talk about it. This one is a story from Don't Turn the Lights Out, which is edited by Jonathan Mayberry, has a bunch of different authors in it. Now, this short story collection is often very disliked by people because it didn't really feel like scary stories to tell in the dark. But there is one story from here that everyone loves, and that's the one I'm talking about. It's called The Golden Peacock by Aletha Contis. I believe that's how you say her name. The Golden Peacock is about this family who ends up inheriting this painting from a family member that passes it down to them. And it's essentially this entire painting is just a single golden peacock feather that is put in the middle of it. And the golden peacock feather, if you hang it up, if you guys know how peacock feathers look, this specific one looks like an eyeball that's staring back at you because of how peacock feathers look, and it's a golden peacock. And the story behind this is that this painting is the urban legend goes that this dates back to ancient Greece, right? In ancient Greece, I believe Hera, or one of the Greek goddesses, had a watchdog, which was a 100 eyed giant that
Hmm.
people used to essentially sacrifice eyeballs to, right, as tribute. So there was a girl at that time who I think her name was Medora or something. So this girl might have been a real life girl that was tied to an ancient Greek empire, or she might actually be from the urban legend. But Medora is kind of the girl who's tied to this urban legend about this painting because this one-eyed peacock kind of ties to that Hera watchdog 100-eyed giant thing. And this is information that the parents withhold from the daughter. They just think it's a cool set piece to inherit from the family, so they end up putting it in the daughter's room. So as they hang it up in the daughter's room, they think that it's a nice set piece. She really appreciates it. But what ends up happening is that night after night, the daughter ends up coming into their room and basically telling them that something is speaking to her, right? She's having this strange girl who keeps appearing in her room, which may or may not be an apparition, a ghost. And it seems like, okay, she has an overactive imagination. This is a new type of situation, a new type of house with a family gift, because since they moved into this new house, this was a inherited family gift that they got. So she might just be, thinking up things. But then she mentions the name of the ghost and says her name is Medora. And right away they're like, did she just say the name is Medora? That's the same name as the urban legend tied to the painting, but we didn't tell her that. So how does she know about it? And as the story continues, Medora, the girl, basically keeps telling her more and more threatening things, right? She goes from a friendly ghost to becoming more and more mean, maybe demanding some stuff. And eventually, she starts telling the little girl that I need a certain body part. That may be tied to something I mentioned earlier. And she starts making those demands and starts making threats. And right away, the family's freaked out, so they try to get rid of the painting. They try to destroy it, so the dad ends up taking it outside, dumping it away and thinking that's going to solve the problem. Only thing is, when he gets back to the daughter's room, she's missing something. And I'm gonna leave it at that. I don't want to spoil what it is, but something she ends up losing, a particular body part that ties to the urban legend of the painting. And that's effectively where it ends, where he realizes that it's too late. At this point, the ghost has already taken something from his daughter. And this is an extremely dark ending, so I will say that we will change it, right? You can't have that level of gore. So I think the only slight change you need to make, and I'll spoil, is that instead of losing the body part on the daughter, because that's dark, just take away the function of that body part, meaning she loses one of the five senses, and I'll leave it at that. And that'll be the thing that the ghost ends up taking away from her. I think this is probably one of the scariest ghost stories out there. I mean, it has that idea of the girl in the painting, right? It has this creepy painting that might be more alive, might have more occult aspects to it than, understandable. It has some aspects of ear for music, where there is this ancient urban legend and history tied to this painting. Again, the idea that this, belonged to Hera's watchdog, the 100-eyed giant, who used to get tributes of eyeballs and eyesight to it. Very dark stuff. This ominous girl ghost who appears in there. And the implication of this story, which is why I said that it's like hereditary for kids, is because it's implied that since they moved into this new house, whichever family member gave them this painting must have known about the sacrifice that needs to be given to it. So they passed it along, because if they didn't do it, then the girl wouldn't leave them alone. So it's extremely dark. It has a lot of dark implications. And I'm just going to say this. If you like what happens in the Haunting Hour episode, The Red Dress, you're going to have some liking towards this episode with the direction that we go. So that's my pick for a ghost story and the last one on the roster.
Yeah, I was about to say that from the sound of it, it kind of sounds like the red dress meets walls meets a few other things
Mm-hmm.
involving like the stipulation. That is very interesting because so far on this list, all of these kind of have throwback elements to previous Haunting Hour episodes for the most part, and I was not expecting to hear like that level of like, oh, this is kind of like you blend these two ideas. But the story itself seems very parent focused, which is nice. I kind of like that as a change of pace. Parents are more involved. They seem to care about the daughter. The family heirloom element is something that I've always been kind of fascinated with in kids horror. Like in the Dead House episode, there was the wreath and a bunch of other like random stuff that's been done over time with family heirlooms and stuff like that. But the idea that the item itself needs a sacrifice to, I guess, bring the family good fortune and the parents being in on it, I love that idea. That's so dark. I think Night of the Squawker. Well, you haven't read the book, but Night of the Squawker is kind of similar on that element too. And that's probably one of the things I like most about that book. Bringing that element into the show was really cool because you're supposed to trust your parents, but if you can't trust your parents, who can you trust, right? Um, and yeah, I agree. The ending from the sound. Yeah, I don't know if they can pull out like you know what I'm doing with this
Yep.
gesture here. I don't know if they can do
No,
that.
they'll need to
But
go the red
you're right.
dress.
You're right on the money with the sensory thing.
Yeah. Also, the way that the short story ends, it ends with a cautionary element, basically kind of breaking the meta after this whole story takes place. It says that, the next time you're at an art exhibit or maybe you're at a garage sale and you see a painting with the golden peacock, beware. I think that could also be the ending to the episode where after this whole thing happens, maybe you cut to a local garage sale or an art exhibit in this neighborhood and you see the golden peacock on a wall and it's kind of ambiguously implied that this might end up in somebody else's hands or the
Hmm.
family, because when the dad gets rid of the painting at the end, it's gone, so it's kind of implied that this ended up with a mind of its own going to the next victim and the next victim and the next victim, so very dark implications.
So yeah, once it leaves the family, it needs a new family to target. Oh,
Yep.
that's cool. I like that. Oh, that's so cool. Oh my gosh. Yeah, basically all 16 recommendations we have, I think, are just brilliant. Absolutely brilliant for a show like Haunting Hour. Um, and I think, in the heart of it, I think if you are out there listening to this whole collab, first of all, thank you. But if you're out there listening along with us, you probably hear that these stories really are trying to take what's currently fan revered with the old Haunting Hour show and continuing those type of stories, but elevating it, keeping more unique monsters, unique ideas, throwback ideas, with some splicing going on to kind of freshen things up, um, and bringing something familiar yet worthwhile for today's audience for Haunting Hour. Which some people can debate in the comment section, saying, Haunting Hour should just be a kids show first and foremost, and that's fine. I think this would be made for kids, but I also think that if we're going to subscribe to the notion that Goosebumps 2023 kind of threw out into the modern ether, that things need to be darker for people to care about it these days because kids are desensitized to stuff like Goosebumps from the 90s and Are You Afraid of the Dark? Then it makes sense why you would go with stuff like this. Um, and I think us keeping it true with the short stories here make it worthwhile. I don't think there's a single person out there. I think even Horlander will agree with this, that doesn't mind the idea that they also write new stories for the show. In mind, they can write treatments if they have faith. That's fine. Have faith, but make it because you believe in it. Don't make it because budget allows it. Uh, we've seen that too many times in across kids horror history where they just made it because they can afford it, not because it was worth it.
Yeah.
And that's how the cookie crumbles most of the time, man. Pick the stories that are worth telling. I always say that, right? Um, and like I said, Haunting Hour is like Creepshow. This is one of the franchises where you should be gung ho about adaptations and
Mhm.
picking random things because you can throw so much at the wall and make it stick. There's not there's only a finite amount of stories from Nightmare Hour and Haunting Hour. There's only 20, and a good amount of them have already been made.
Yeah.
So,
You also gotta, I was gonna say, you also gotta think about it. For anyone who thinks that, we're going too far, I would also suggest that you review The Haunting Hour because this is the one kids horror show which took the risk of always trying to go too far. I mean, let me remind you guys, two episodes have the apocalypse happen. All right? There's like two episodes where straight up the apocalypse, end of the world happens. And if you look at our short stories, outside of Wax Coffins, really none of them kind of push, um, maturity level that some of the episodes did. We talked about Golden Peacock. We mentioned the red dress. When it comes to the idea of, let's say, licorice needles, you have stuff like the cast. So we're still
mhm.
keeping the boundaries, but just having, kind of more evolved ideas, stuff that'll stick with people. But, if you agree with us or if you don't agree, that's what the comments are for.
Yeah, and by all means, if there's a story that you've come across that was not mentioned in a certain collection that you think would be a shoe in Haunting Hour tale, share it with everyone. Because this is what this is supposed to be. This is supposed to be an open discussion. This is supposed to be like a talking point. Let's say a producer or somebody in Hollywood is looking for ideas and they see passion fans out here making discussion, making noise about this stuff. This is how stuff catches traction, right? So it doesn't matter necessarily if all 16 that we picked here are adapted, really matters if just one is, because that means we made an impact. That means we put it out there, and whatever stuck, right? And that's really what matters. So if you want to contribute to this conversation, please keep it going in the comment section down below. And better yet, let us know if you actually want to see Haunting Hour continue in this way, or you can say, oh, you just want Haunting Hour continue in the former way. It doesn't matter at the end of the day what we really want, as long as Haunting Hour brings back the hope for kids horror, right? And I like we said in the very beginning of the video, this is the franchise that I think has the most potential to put the most stock into. We should be focusing on stuff that has smoke right now. If there's nothing with smoke, there's probably no fire, right? So concentrate on the stuff with smoke. Haunting Hour's got movies that will probably lead to a fire for a TV show. And that's where we're hoping the needle moves. Because as much as I like the idea of Haunting Hour movies, I think we can have Haunting Hour movies, and I think actually Horlander came up with this idea where we can have more R.L. Stein adaptations in movies and make the show more like a breeding ground for outside adaptations and new content being made. Um, and I think it would be spectacular. I want Haunting Hour to come back. I think it had an undeserved death when it went out. It got basically canned because of a network getting bought. It wasn't anything to do with the show. It had everything to do with the network, which sucks. And yeah, I think a lot of people want it back. It was my favorite show when it was out for a long time, and it's been one of my favorite shows of all time ever since. And I think that nostalgia, that 2010s nostalgia is coming. It's going to come sooner than later. Believe it or not. Not a lot of people have that, but it's coming. And I would have more faith in that than like a Goosebumps revival or Are You Afraid of the Dark revival at this point.
I agree.
Yeah. So yeah, that's our collab. Thank you so much for coming on, Horlander. I love that you love Haunting Hour and love to spend 2 hours talking with me about this hypothetical thing. I know when we do collabs, our videos are typically longer, but we're very passionate and we have a lot to say. So we appreciate all of you for sticking around here too. I'm gonna put the Horlanders handle and everything into the video so you can see that he's co-authored this with me, and I'll put his channel and socials in the link in this comment section of this video as well. So you go check him out and go sub him up if you aren't currently doing so. Anything to close out before we head out tonight?
No, that's all I got. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. And for anyone listening who has the power to make what we say come true, get active because I'm watching and I will not let you go.
Yep. Keep that in mind, everyone. Have a good night.
Deuces.